Hi, and welcome to another episode of Money Talk. You know, we don't just talk about money here, we talk about how to get it, how and what to do with it. But we also do other things with that, like, I don't know, about how to earn it, how to manage it, how to build your wealth, and the kinds of businesses that come in and tell us how to do that business. Well, today we've got a very, very special guest, and our special guest is going to talk to us and probably drop the F bomb once or twice. Stay tuned. You're going to find out why he's doing that.
Linda gave me the courage, the confidence to move forward.
And after I was finished with Linda K's training, I was at the next level.
It's Linda K. But when you trust that piece of you that says, I got something to give, I have something to say, you know you've got something to do.
Get on your feet, shake your hands in the air. Welcome to the stage, Linda K.
And I told you I'd be right back. I want you to also do something for me. Many of you have been listening and making comments, and I love those comments. So we're live right now. So if you've got something on your mind, drop it into the chat on one of our social media platforms, wherever you are, and we'll answer you, honestly, right on the air. So I did promise you that our guest is going to drop a few F-bombs, but his F-bombs have to do with finance. So when we talk about finances and the ability to control your finances, you're going to have some financial freedom that you've never, ever experienced before without that. And who wouldn't want to grab that kind of freedom, right? You know, when you're starting a business and you're using personal savings and paychecks, and you go from one job to another to try to build your capital. And I always say, stay in that day job while you're building that business, because it's the cheapest loan you'll ever have. But when we're talking about how we can eliminate debt and how we can pave our way to financial freedom, we sometimes forget about that when we're building our business. Our special guest today is a master financial coach and founder of Sizemore Financial. Welcome to the stage, Cody Sizemore. Hey, Cody.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm delighted to have you. You know, I've had so many people on the show that have talked about how to build their money, what to do with the money, how to invest the money. But when you've got too much month at the end of the money, that's a problem, isn't it?
It sure is. Yeah. And it's something that, so many people struggle with, So, that's why I'm really passionate about it, is because that's like the first step to really building that wealth and creating the life that you want to live.
So now, listen, before we dive into debt and all these other things, are there other and better and smarter ways to gain money besides our day job, right? Because our little side hustle, while we're trying to build it, no better loan than having your paycheck, right? So you can finance that. But we too often find ourselves, while we're building the business, where our first year has our biggest costs associated with it. We're now putting debt on the credit cards. We're now borrowing. We're emptying out the 401k. We're doing all the things. And I know in the back of your head, your head is screaming, no, stop it.
Yeah.
But we can't help ourselves. What can we do to really get a better handle on, are we ready to start a business, or the business that we have, are we bleeding arterially because we're not watching our numbers?
Yeah. So I think you bring up a good point about, that day job, keeping it while you're trying to grow that business, because that's exactly what I did with even like my practice that I do with financial coaching. And the best way that I can kind of explain it is like, if you think about the business being like that yacht that you want to be on, right? And then the day job being kind of like the loading dock. You have to have that yacht or that boat a little bit closer to that dock, so that it's not this thing that you have to like jump and just kind of hope that you hit the yacht, like, because you might fall in some water, right? It's like
you will fall in the water, Cody.
You get that closer to the dock, then you can take that step, and that way it's a lot better. You'll be able to go out in that water and enjoy your time.
Well, what you're suggesting then is that it should be a step and not a jump.
Exactly. Like, you'll know when the right time to go full time with your business or with your practice is, because the numbers will tell you, but yeah, having that that job, that day job, to help fund the dream business or the business that you're trying to build is really important. Even just getting creative and just finding things to do on the side to help generate a little bit more income, selling some things. Maybe even I think that one of the biggest things, though, I'll be honest with you, Linda, is I have found that people have way more money than they actually think. It's just the fact that, like, we don't know what really happens to it. We really know what is happening to it. And if you're able to figure that out.
I am so all over that comment. Honest to
Mhm.
God. I'm looking at why don't I have more, right? And I'm
Mhm.
looking at my personal finances last year and my business finances, and I'm like, I am really making money. Why don't I have any? What happened to it?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's something that happens to so many people. I mean, I could tell you case study after case study of people who were either breaking even or they were going backwards every month because they're just putting stuff on credit cards, to then instead, like, once we actually figured out, like, hey, what has been happening, and then refining it in a way that's going to reflect two things. Number one, their goals. Number two, their values. But reflecting it in the sense that it's actually going to work for them. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, I have an extra $500, $1,000, $2,000, $4,000 at the end of every month that I wasn't making work for me as best as I could before, but now I am, and that's springboarding me with my goals, my passions, my desires, all that kind of stuff. So that's the number one thing I think, is just figuring out what's going on with the finances and figuring out how to manage it in a way that's actually going to serve you versus you constantly just busting your butt for it all the time.
That does sound way too familiar. Now you mentioned the two things. One is about your goals, but looking at your money, it's about your values. Talk to me
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up, Linda, is because especially in the industry and space that I'm in, with, like, people trying to help people pay off debt. There's a lot of people out there that will tell you that you should give up everything that you love. You should not go out to eat. You should not take your vacation. You should not have the kids play sports, all that kind of stuff, for the sake of just paying off the debt quicker. And will that work? Yes. You'll get out of that debt probably a little bit quicker. But there's two things that are going to happen if you take that route of just, like, super scorched earth, scarcity, and just giving up everything that you love. Number one is that, like, you're probably going to end up resenting the whole process, and it's going to lead to burnout. And when that burnout happens, then you're going to binge spend, and you're going to be super, like, ashamed, and you're going to feel guilty. You're going to be pissed off, and then you're not going to want to come back to it and, try and fix it again. So that's one thing that's going to happen. The other thing that's going to happen is that, hey, maybe you see it through. Maybe you push through the hard times and you push through all that sacrifice, and then you get yourself out of debt. You get the money in the bank. But then throughout that whole process, what you've done is you've conditioned your brain to be in this, like, scarcity mindset, that once you get to that finish line, you're going to be afraid to actually enjoy your money, and you're not going to know how to enjoy your money. And then you're going to sit there and be like, well, what was all that for? Because I'm out of this. I have the money in the bank and I'm still uncomfortable, So I'm a big proponent that, like, you need to enjoy the journey. I'd much rather you have to, add 6 months to your debt payoff journey if it means that it's going to be something that you actually enjoy, that's sustainable, versus just getting out of debt 6 months sooner. So that's what I mean by the value side of things.
That makes total sense because, and I love what you said about you will probably resent where you've been, but prior to saying that, you were like, oh my God, you were talking about getting that money and having that scarcity mindset and then going out and binge shopping, binge buying, right? Because you haven't had the money for a while. So what are some of the things that you can do? Because you're talking about spikes and valleys. So how can we smooth out some of that spike in valley?
I think it really comes down to a few things. Number one is just deciding, like, what's important to you. Like, of course, the financial goals are important to you, but there's other things in life that are important to you as well. And I always say all the time, like, money isn't everything, but it does affect everything, like, and everything affects it too. So, like, it affects our mental health, our emotional health, our marriage, our career choices, where we choose to live, all these different types of things, our kids, like stuff like that, right? So we have to
money
look at it.
What you're saying is money isn't everything, but money makes everything easier.
Correct. You're correct. Yes. And everything is easier if the money is in a good place. You know, it's one of those rare areas in life that, like, if this one area is good, then it has the possibility to allow the other areas to also rise up as well, right? So I think that just figuring out what's important to you and also why it's important to you as well is step number one. And then step number two is just figuring out, like, okay, how can we be intentional with this? And what I mean by intentional is, again, intentional towards your goals and making sure that you're holding yourself accountable with those, but then also intentional with what's actually important to you as well, and making sure that you're not just like completely ignoring those either. I don't like the word balance, because I don't think that balance is exactly the goal that we should be going after. I think that just intentional is, like, if it means 70-30 and that's intentional, then cool, that's intentional. If it's 50-50, that's intentional too. If it's 90-10, that's intentional too. But it's about what intentionality means to this specific person, because personal finance, at the end of the day, it's personal. There is no cookie cutter, one size fits all kind of thing.
Give me an example of and let's use some examples that our listeners would be able to relate to. Let's just say that in the in starting up a business, many of these businesses don't clear a six-figure, probably for their first couple of years, if they make them at all. So their goal is when they're looking at their goal, they're looking at a longer term goal of, I want to get to that number. But I always like to advise them to dial it back just a little bit further and make the target a monthly goal. So you're looking at, when you're hitting your stride and you're coaching people, if you're hitting that $5,000 a month consistently, now you're going to be able to add more to it. So what would you recommend to the as in terms of a ratio of expenses to that kind of earning till the time that they actually hit the six figures?
So a ratio is kind of hard to pinpoint because everyone's financial landscape looks a bit different.
Well, and if you live in California, we know how different that is, right?
Right. And I'm in Ohio, so, like, our expenses are much different than someone in California, right?
Right.
But I would say, like, if it's possible to, there's that old, like, 50-30-20 rule kind of thing, to where it's like, okay, if we can keep our expenses to 50%, our savings, or our lifestyle to 30%, and then save about 20%. And what I mean by save is, paying off debt, building up savings, or investing to 20%. That's like a general good rule of thumb. Now, obviously, some people can do it higher. Some people need to be a little bit lower, but that's a general good kind of standpoint. I do want to just address one thing that you said about, that six-figure goal for the year, right? And then you said, hey, what if we scale it back and we actually make it like a monthly goal? I would actually recommend that we scale it back even further. And I would say let's focus on just the day. Because honestly, if we really think about it,
having one at a time, right?
Yeah, because having those big goals are important, but sometimes they're so big that we get overwhelmed by them, or we get too consumed by them, right? And sometimes, like, we'll have those days where it's like, oh, well, this is a year goal, so if I kind of take it easy today, it's not that big of a deal. And then the next day comes, you have that same kind of process too. And then eventually it just starts to get away from us. And then it's like, well, I'll never hit this big goal, right? But if we really focus on just winning the day, and that's it, like, we're not concerned about what happened yesterday. We're not concerned about what's happening tomorrow. We're just focused on, how can I make sure that today is a win? And then the next day comes and you do the same exact thing. You don't worry about what happened yesterday. You don't worry about what happened tomorrow. And you just say, how can I make sure that today is a win? And what do I need to do in order to execute for that? If you do that day in and day out, the chances of you winning that day are way higher than winning that month, and even higher than winning that year. But then eventually those little micro wins start to stack on top of each other, and they turn into those macro wins. And that's how you actually succeed with finances, with building a business, with really anything in life. It's just focusing on those little wins and having them multiply and compound.
I love that. I love the fact that, because we can get so carried away with, well, I have this to pay, I have that to pay, and that can get overwhelming. But, we tend to get things and pay things in tranches, right? The 1st and the 15th, because a paycheck came in,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
when you're an entrepreneur, every day is starting over. Every
Mhm.
day, right? Unless you've got regular money coming in, mailbox money from your investments or mailbox money from your royalties, or you've got consistent coaching and clients that are daily filling your cup. We start over literally every single day, and so that's a great reminder to say that we can only take one step at a time, meaning that one day and that goal. Win the day.
That's all
That's
you gotta
so
do.
good. That's
Yep.
really cool. Talk to me about your podcast. You have a podcast too.
I do have a podcast. Yeah. So the podcast isn't exactly for like the people that I serve. I actually started it because when I was first starting this financial coaching journey, I was just trying to find something to learn from, and there was
I
no
think that's how we
podcast
all
out
start.
there. Yeah, there was no podcast out there for financial coaches specifically. There was a couple episodes every now and then, but not like a show. So I just decided, I'm like, I'll just start one and help people who are trying to do what I do. So I started a podcast that's simply called the Financial Coaches Podcast, and it's a show for coaches by coaches in this financial space. So I've been doing that for the last, it'll be 3 years come September, and it's been growing and it's been great. I have coaches all over the country reaching out to me, asking me questions, telling me that they took this piece of advice and it's really helping them with their clients, or it's helping them scale their practice or whatever it may be. And that's so rewarding to me, because I have my own circle of influence with the people that I help get out of debt or build up their savings or start investing. And that's really rewarding in the first place. But to know that my influence has been able to cast a wider net over the course of the country and all this kind of stuff, to help those other coaches kind of work through me and the teachings that I have on that podcast. It's so rewarding. And am I getting anything from it? No, but
You are.
I'm getting
Yes,
that in
you
my
are.
soul. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's
It's
what's really
feeding your
important.
soul. That's exactly what it's doing. Is it's feeding your soul. What
Mhm.
kind of issues do coaches typically have with their finances?
With their clients having issues with the client or with their
Well,
finances, or
yeah.
them
So
themselves.
you're talking about finances for coaches. So typically, when I think about helping a coach with their finances, are they struggling, or are they giving advice to their clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the coaches that I have on my podcast, they are financial coaches who help people with their finances. But honestly, there's a lot of financial coaches, or even just coaches in general. I've actually coached a lot of coaches as well, who struggle with this, because it's one thing to have a good practice or a good business that makes 6 figures or multiple 6 figures or whatever. But if you have so many expenses or so many different lines of debt that's eating up that revenue, it's like, okay, well, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a $1 million practice that generates $1 million in revenue, but you have $900,000 of expenses, so you only bring home $100,000? Or would you rather have a $300,000 practice that only has $100,000 in expenses, so you actually bring home $200,000? I think the answer to that would be well, I'd rather bring home 200 versus 100. It's
Okay. Okay.
like,
I'm going to challenge you on that.
okay,
I'm
go
going
for
to
it.
challenge you on that.
Go for it.
Let's just say that I had $1 million business,
Mhm.
and I had $900,000 in expenses, but I had a hell of a time spending that money and doing the things that I wanted to do, as opposed to having 1/3 of that, where I bring home $200,000 and I had $100,000 in expenses, but I'm going to get half of that to the IRS and in my case, the California Franchise Tax Board.
Mhm.
So I didn't enjoy that. I'm being the devil's advocate here, because we're gonna have listeners that go, well, I don't know, I'd rather have the $1 million and have a hell of a good time and buy
Yeah.
all the stuff that I need, call it a business expense, than only make 1/3 of that and have to give 1/3 of that to the government.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say this, that there's two different things I say here.
Okay.
Number one is that there's a difference between expense and then also debts as well. So one thing that I have seen is that like even the people who make less and they bring home more, they're still enjoying themselves. They're still able to, take those trips and do those retreats and stuff like that. And it's still a lot of fun, right?
Okay.
But there's a lot of businesses that operate off of trying to scale with different lines of like credit or anything like that, which there's nothing wrong with that if it's in a healthy way. But what I found is that like there's a lot of people who get addicted to that idea of growth, and then they actually end up overextending themselves to where they need to make all this money in order to pay all these bills, and that's where it's like, well, that doesn't actually become fun because
No, that's
it's
stressful.
like a trap almost,
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's get out of that trap and allow you to do these retreats, take these trips, spend the money where you want to spend it, and have it be something that we do that's like conducive so that we don't have to be held back from it once it's done or over with. If that
Right.
makes sense. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
That makes total sense. Yep.
Mhm.
I get it because, I guess it depends on the playground that you're playing in. Some people really get used to the stress that comes with having to really work and hustle and do all of that, and then have the leverage of the debt to keep them and motivate them. So
Right.
I think that you're talking about what motivates different people, and we're all different, right? So some people are negatively motivated. You tell them you can't do that, they'll go, I'll show you how I can do that, right?
Mhm.
So, can they also do this with their finances?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that like, so when it comes to personal finances, I have found that the money and getting things into a really healthy place and the numbers and the structures with things, that's really important. But I think it really is like only about 20% of it, to be honest with you. I think the other 80%, Linda, it has to do with the person behind the money. So there's a lot of things that go on with like money psychology. So how things are affecting their brain, what's coming out of their heart, what's actually causing them to have a certain relationship with money, or what's causing them to have these spending habits that they might have, and where is it coming from, and why is it happening, and all these different types of things. And if a person has the opportunity to really learn more about themselves and where things are coming from, why they behave a certain way, why they believe certain things, and they can really get it into a place that really serves them, that is like the secret ingredient to truly turning things around. And that's something that I have seen even with the people that I have coached, is that like when people finally understand why they're behaving a certain way, then they're like, okay, I get it. And now I know what I need to do in order to level up, and then it's off to the races, because it's one thing to just put things in a spreadsheet. It's another thing to actually execute and follow through with it, right? And that follow through really does come from what's going on in here and also in here, right? So that's what I found is like the money psychology side of things is really, really important.
So talk to us a little bit about the money psychology, and if that is what you're referring to as the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, that 80% of how we think about it will show up, as opposed to you need 80% money to get your business going. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What does that mean? I understand the heart space, but you can also you can spend a lot of time in that heart space and not work on that head space, that piece of it says, sit down and do the work. Sit down and figure it out. Sit down and follow through. Sit down and work out your numbers. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that it'd probably be best explained if I were to just give like an example of one trend that I see. There's a lot of trends, and going back to my previous comment, like personal finance is personal, but there are certain trends from person to person that I kind of picked up on.
Okay.
So one trend in particular about a person's relationship with money would be something like this. Let's say that someone grew up and they grew up in a household that like didn't have a lot of money, or they grew up in a household that was broken. You know, maybe there's divorce, or maybe there was like some substance abuse or domestic violence or whatever it may be. But they had some sort of upbringing, whether it be in their childhood, their adolescence, or early adulthood, that they just felt like was out of their control. You know, it was just the cards that they were dealt, kind of thing. Well, when someone comes from that kind of background, which a lot of people do, they get into their adulthood and they start making big girl money, big boy money, and they have like their big girl, big boy job. And then all of a sudden they have like this newfound autonomy that they're like, wait a second, for the first time in my life, I don't have anything controlling my outcome, and it's just me, and I'm making my own destiny, kind of thing, and I can make my own choices and all these different types of things, right? So then they're like so fired up on that they start just saying like, I can do what I want with my life. And then they just go off and they start buying all of these things because they're trying to say like, well, I never had this as a kid, or I wasn't able to do this as a kid, or, you know, like I want this now, or anything like that, right? So what they're trying to do is they're not actually going after that stuff. What they're actually going after is this sense of control over their lives. But that very thing that they're going after, which is that sense of control, is actually the very thing that's putting their finances out of control. And it's a really interesting paradigm that happens there, and people don't even realize it. But once we actually bring that to the surface and we say, hey, this is maybe what's happening, they're like, holy cow, I'm actually recreating the very thing that I was trying to get away from, except this time I'm doing it willingly.
I'm not only willingly doing it, I'm doing it with my eyes closed, right?
Right.
But what you're referring to is maybe the entrepreneur, the Gen X, or the younger, or the millennial that's coming into that money. But can you take that pattern into your adulthood, as into your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, without ever making that correction? So you'll see that pattern over and over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk to people, you know, as young as like their early 20s and you know, it's people deal with the same thing over and over and over, right? Like, you know, obviously everyone's a little bit different, but there are certain trends. And that is one that I've seen from every age group. And it's just one of those things where it's like, if you never notice it, if you never address it, it's just going to keep festering and it's going to keep growing over time. And the longer that it goes on, the harder that it is to reprimand, you know, to like get into a really good place. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
So the sooner you figure it out, the better.
Clearly, that would be key. What are some of the what you're talking about here is a value that they grew up with, right? So they grew up with money doesn't grow on trees. I used to hear this all the time as a kid. My dad would say, well, where are you going to get this money? Money doesn't grow on trees. And I always prayed for us to get that money tree so we could just go pick it off the branches, right? But when you hear those messages over and over again, you know, that there becomes a part of you that says, I'm not worthy. I don't deserve to have that. And then when they get the money, because they've internalized, and that's subconscious, is making sure that our conscious will behave the way our subconscious is, that we don't deserve that money, whoosh, it's gone.
Yep. You bring up an amazing point, because that's another trend that I find as well. People feeling like they don't deserve it, like they're not worthy, and they do exactly what you said. You know, like as soon as they start to get some sort of traction, it's almost like they self-sabotage, and they're like, nope, I'm just gonna get rid of this, kind of thing. And it's almost like
consciously say, hey, you know, I want to get rid of my money, because that's why we're working. That's what we're doing. It's so it's insidious. It's deep. It's under the skin. It's between the ears, right?
Yeah.
How do we become aware of what our habits are, or what our value systems are? What can you say to our audience? But tell our audience that it doesn't have to stay that way. You can change this.
Yeah, there's a number of things that you can do. I'd say that, you know, step number one is maybe just pull up your transaction history. and just look at them and just be like, what was the purpose of each of these purchases? And like, what was the end game? What was I trying to get out of it? Like anything like that, right? And then just look for trends. I think that's probably step one. But then I think step number two would really actually just be to either have a conversation with yourself, with your spouse, or even with, a professional like myself, and talk about like, what are those pain points that you feel like you have with money? So that could be like a behavior, a mindset, a thought pattern, a habit, whatever it may be, but just those things that you feel are either unhealthy or they're counterproductive or they're not working very well for you. And just identifying those and just, not just identifying, but also digging a little bit deeper and saying like, okay, so this is what it is. Why do I feel like I'm doing this? Or where do I feel like this is coming from? And then also really unpacking like what happened in your upbringing, like how are your parents with money? What were some of the things that they did? How did you feel about your situation growing up? What was it like for your friends? And how did you feel about those situations? And then just looking at all of those things on paper and just looking for some dots to connect and being like, okay, so maybe I'm struggling with this because I dealt with this or because I feel this way. And that's what's actually causing this outcome. And then how can I actually shift this to find a countering belief that actually like empowers me versus keeps me stuck where I'm at? And then just every day, like I said, focusing on that winning the day kind of thing, every day, just saying, hey, I'm going to live into this new and empowering mindset or this new and empowering action. And this is going to be my focus today to try and overcome this thing that I'm dealing with. And the next day you do the same thing. And the next day you do the same thing. That's what I would say is probably the first step.
It sounds easy, but
it's hard.
It is. It's really, really hard because, I mean, I can imagine that not everybody is sitting down and looking at their numbers. In fact, very few of them are going to pick up their statement and go, okay, yeah, I spent money on that. And let me see, let me reconcile my bank account. How many of your clients are actually doing that or hiring somebody to do that so they can feel like they are financially intelligent? Because one of the things that always has bugged me, Cody, is that, kids come out of high school, they don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to manage their credit cards. Right. They, all of a sudden they are now, going, I don't have to, because many of them didn't even work, coming up through high school. And I always have always wondered what kind of disservice we have done as a society to our next generation. And this was perpetuated. And yet we still, this pervasive issue of, money doesn't grow on trees, or there's not enough to go around, or, living in this scarcity. It's hard to get to the mindset that you're talking about. So what are some of the things that you could tell our listeners, things that they could be doing besides this one day at a time? Are there affirmations? Are there things that they should be doing with their finances to look at this? Talk to me about this.
Yeah. So first and foremost, let me just address the thing that you brought up about, the kids not being taught anything about finances growing up. I think that's by design, personally. Like you don't teach the people, so then they get stuck into the system that benefits, everyone up top, right? So I think that is part of it. And we have created this culture to where like the adults don't know what they're doing. So then the kids come to the adults for answers, and they don't know how to teach them. And then those kids turn into adults that don't know what they're doing. And then those kids come to, it's like a vicious cycle kind of thing.
It is. Oh my goodness. You're so right.
It's tough, like you got to find those people who took the time to really learn. And sometimes it's from other people. Sometimes it's just from research, and sometimes it's a mix of two. Right. Yep. But I really do believe that like what it really comes down to is we have to find out why we actually want to accomplish these goals in the first place. If our goal is just to pay off debt, or, and then we ask ourselves like, well, why do we want to pay off the debt? And then we just say like, I just don't want to be stressed anymore. Or, I would love to, start this business, but I just feel like I can't. like those are good reasons, but they're kind of surface level to where like if any one thing goes wrong, you're going to be like, well, this isn't working because I'm still stressed out. You know, I think that we really have to find like that deeper why that's something that really matters to us, that's actually worth fighting for, that like we would actually put in that work. We'd put in that consistency. We'd put in the research and the time to correct this issue because it's so important. And I think that without that, it's really difficult to not only do this thing, but also to follow through with it on a consistent basis, because it's like, hey, if you're just working towards not being stressed, spoiler alert, the journey to the promised land of being debt free is gonna be stressful, you know. So like
true.
you're not gonna like avoid it, you know what I mean? Like you have to find that thing that's going to allow you to rise above that. And that's another piece of that money psychology side of things. It's like, you know, you can talk about all these things that you can do, looking at the transactions, setting up a really good budget, you know, working like a system to pay off your debt, all that kind of stuff. You can put all of that in place. But if there isn't also those like mental and emotional drivers that really inspire you when you really need it most, unfortunately, you're probably just going to fall short at the very first thing that happens that comes up that isn't a part of your ideal perfect plan.
That's interesting. And I think that it's really important also to point out to our listeners that our why can grow up and move away. My why was absolutely going through a divorce, and I now need to pay the mortgage, pay for the nanny, pay for the housekeeping. I have a complete driver that says my motivation is to keep her in this neighborhood, so she goes to school and has the right opportunities I didn't have. That's my driver. But things can change. Cody, when she grew up, she did not come back.
Right.
All of a sudden, I'm walking through the house, the walls are talking to me, pictures here and over there. And so I think it's really important for us to really be stewards of this, finding that next why, finding the reason, finding your purpose, because over time, purpose changes, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It does. It does. Yeah.
And if you don't have something to drive you, your triggers will.
It's absolutely correct. Yeah. Like, and that's why it's so important is like, and it's also important that maybe you have a why that is strong for that moment in your life. And then something happens where, like you said, like that why moves out. It's important for you to then reassess the situation and say, okay, so now what am I working on now? And what's my why now? You know, and not to just let it be like, oh, well, this happened, so I guess that's just how it is. You know, like we should always be growing and moving forward with the things that are happening in our lives as well. And always, you know, never settling, really. I mean, that's really what it comes down to is like, you know, the moment that we get comfortable, that's when the uncomfortableness starts to seep in.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true. Oh, my Lord have mercy. Well, Cody, I am just so delighted that we're talking about this, because it's a topic that many people don't want to have. They don't want to have to look at it until they have to look at it. So just taking it on a daily daily stroll, walking with your financial mindset and moving yourself through the things that we need to think about. I think all of this is just golden, but we can only take one step and one day at a time.
That's right.
Cody, do you have something for our listeners to find and contact you with? And I'm thinking that we have a couple of ways to reach you, not only in your social media, but probably a couple of there we go. We've got something on your email and your phone number. Mm-hmm. You are coaching people today, aren't you? You are coaching. You're coaching your coaches, and you're coaching through your podcast. Mm-hmm. Do you also privately coach?
I do. Yep, that's actually what I primarily do. Is I work with individuals with their own personal finances. You know, helping coaches. That's like an added passion for me. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, you know, if you want to get connected with me, you know, you can look up Sizemore Financial Coaching on really any of the social media platforms. But I also am offering you guys like a free webinar. So if you guys want to check that out, it's called Master Your Money: 5 Simple Shifts to Rapidly Eliminate Debt and Amplify Your Wealth. And you can find that at www.masteryourmoney.support, not .com, .support, because that's what I really want to give you guys. So masteryourmoney.support. So
that's
awesome. Check it out there.
That is so good. Cody, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom and sharing so much of who you are from your heart and through your head and through that mental muscle of ours. Thank you again for joining us.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And thank you all for joining us today. Today has been an exceptional day to learn more about how we can be purposeful and how we can be in our mindfulness about our money. I did promise you he'd drop a few F-bombs, and I know I didn't disappoint. Anyway, join us next week.
Do you like to talk about money? If you do and you'd like to be a guest, contact me at lindak360.com.